Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads for this week's live Q&A. Hopefully, you're all enjoying your Tuesday so far. This is our second stream of the year, and we really appreciate you all joining us for this week's Q&A. Make sure you're dropping your chats into the chat room. We will answer as many as we can get through tonight on our hour and a half-ish long show. So drop your chats in the chat room if you'd like to support the channel financially. You can do so via Super Chat. It does guarantee your chats being answered immediately after you ask them. We will also guarantee chats from certain tiers of our Patreon and YouTube membership program. So if you want to check out those tiers, make sure you do so because you can get priority chat access as well. We will be getting to as many questions as we can, and they do not have to be Star Wars related. Some in here are about Marvel and some other things in the chat. Love questions that aren't Star Wars related as well. So keep sending in those chats. We do take about 2 per person before cycling back through everybody after we get to as many as we can. But today we're going to kick off our stream talking about the latest piece of news. And as over the next, or I should say, over the last about 2 months or so, we've been trying to find the new format here for the live. At one point, we went full Q&A. It seemed to work for a few weeks. Then a few other weeks, it seemed like the attendance was dropping. Not as many people were interested. So then we went back to a little bit more news. We had our end of the year wrap up. So I think right now we're kind of picking the most popular topic of the week. Going to talk about that. Still planning on doing lives like we did for KOTOR when there is some type of big drop that's not on our Tuesday weekly stream, but these will still be predominantly Q&A. So that's still the focus, but we're going to pull one story, and this week we're going to lead it off with the fact that Tom Cruise was on set of Star Wars Starfighter. Shawn Levy has been doing a lot of talking recently, really promoting this movie. Just so funny because this movie has had so much promotion compared to The Mandalorian and Grogu without even having a trailer, without having even existed really beyond an announcement last year at Star Wars Celebration, without having really any major platform to promote it. But yet we've had 2 promotional stills from this movie. We've had so many interviews about it. We had so many actors talking about it. We've had cast lists. We've had all this stuff around this, and this has really been hyped up where Mandalorian and Grogu has just kind of been sitting there waiting for its time to shine. But when it comes to this, Shawn Levy's been talking so much in the press and in an interview with the New York Times. He recently talked about filming a lightsaber duel scene in the water. The point of the story, I won't read the full thing to you all, but basically, he tells this fun aside about, oh, Tom Cruise came on set. And I was like, Tom, you should pick up a camera and help us shoot this. And then here comes Tom. He's wielding a camera, running around on set, helping us shoot this epic lightsaber duel scene in the water. And that part is kind of in passing, but pretty much from every Star Wars fan I've talked to, no one cares that Tom Cruise was on set as much as they care about the fact that we are getting a lightsaber duel in Star Wars Starfighter, which I think is really big news considering the movie's called Star Wars Starfighter, right? So when this was first announced, a lot of us assumed this was going to be some type of New Republic-esque story. This was going to be some type of maybe Underworld-esque story where you have different groups of skilled starfighters in the maybe in the vein of a Wraith Squadron or Rogue Squadron, just a pure military style action-packed ship dogfighting story. Then as the leaks and rumors started coming out that he was going to be protecting maybe a force sensitive child, maybe Amy Adams was playing a force sensitive, maybe even Ryan Gosling himself is going to be force sensitive. There were a lot of rumors around the force, and now we have a full confirmation from the director himself that there is a lightsaber duel in the movie. I think this is a lot bigger news than really almost anybody's really treating it as, because this is going to be, or lightsaber duels aren't just something that happens in every Star Wars project. Like, this is a rare occurrence, especially in the post streaming era of Star Wars. We've had a lot of live action Star Wars content that haven't had lightsaber duels, or we get one lightsaber duel a season or something like that. This is a big deal to me. So I don't know what your guys' thoughts are on it, but Sonic, you hear that Tom Cruise was on set. You also hear that they have a lightsaber duel in Star Wars Starfighter. What are your thoughts on this story?
The only thing I can think is that that's excellent news for just the intensity and style that Starfighter is trying to achieve. Like you said, Mandalorian Grogu kinda seems like a wait and see, quite literally in every shape and form. Like, we're still not seeing any stills. We're starting to see some, like, promotional materials and, like, merchandise boxing and stuff like that, but it's like we're still waiting. Like, I don't know what we're waiting for. I Now it seems like we've finished the Doomsday sort of teasers too, so I'm not sure if that was, like, the last thing waiting for them. I think if anything, it would have actually helped a little bit with Avatar: Fire and Ash too, because, if the first film made 2.9 and that one made 2.3, this one they're saying is only gonna make, like, 1.5, 1.6 billion, which, by box office standards, especially today, still is insane money, but yeah, like, why not, like, help your big franchise that doesn't necessarily have the same cultural clout and long stay whenever it has its time in the sun, right? By having like an extra little reason to come and watch it, right? You had some of the Doomsday stuff, but not every single theater showed it. But if you put every Avatar formatted with a sort of Mandalorian Grogu trailer, whether it be the first online one, whether it be the one that they showed in IMAX that has a little bit more action in it, whether it be the celebration one, yeah, we'd probably start hearing a lot more people energized and excited for it. But yet, like you said, what people are excited by is Starfighter because we've seemingly got more for something that's a year out. And I think that Tom Cruise angle is kind of being downplayed a little bit just because, more recently when he's kind of on these like kind of like publicity tours of film sets and all, and showed up for like different screenings and stuff. Maybe he hasn't had the best word and reputation since saying The Flash is one of the best films he's ever seen. That probably doesn't sit well, that's a little PR stunt on his behalf. And as much as I enjoyed Final Reckoning second half, it is also a very long film. It was super delayed. That franchise basically peaked at Fallout and could have honestly ended there and it would have been great. He's kind of exiting out of this era of like being this action superstar when his peak was, 5, 6 years ago from that. So maybe Tom Cruise in some ways isn't, as defined as a Hollywood star is. Like we know he is, but what part of his like career arc he's in, I don't think we have any definitive right now for him. So I think until we start seeing him with that new movie with, Inarritu that supposedly is gonna get him back to more like the '90s Tom Cruise of, like, trying to go for our tourist-driven making, way more focused on, like, his really strong acting skills and range, or if he just doubles back down again on action, we're gonna be, like, still waiting and to see what that means. But the one thing that I think we can still take away from that is that even if he is exiting this action-oriented era for him as a filmmaker, the fact that he's still applying those skills moving forward and he's willing to help out people like Shawn Levy and all that, like, that's really cool. Like, he just grabbed the camera and he's like, "Let's go, let's shoot it." I mean, at the end of the day, I don't think McQuarrie isn't like a fully capable director, but I think it's also because of his collaboration with Tom Cruise that they were able to continuously make the action crazier, more like achievable, right? Like for any other actor, it seems like you're saying things that just no safety concerns, all this and that, and you don't think about the technical, about the camera, about the lighting and all that because you're like, it just stunts alone won't make sense. But he's always continuously pushed himself, right, with every single little thing he's done. I'm not expecting us to have, like, base jumping Star Wars lightsaber battles in the air, stuff like that. That would be very Old Republic coded for sure, like the cinematics of the day. But for him to be like, yeah, he's, like, kinda in the water, trudging around, like, it seems like he's trying to add some flavor or he was asked to, like, bring some sort of vision and that they can add to it or work around it, blend it into the Star Wars style. And that gets me excited. That really does get me excited. The fact that it's a lightsaber duel also makes this feel a lot less of like a, "Oh, just a random spin-off," to like, "Oh, this could be like a foundational piece," like you said too before, Liam, like a semi-reboot of the sequel era with the new cast of characters that then allows the sequel stars to come in in more clear, defined roles and go from supporting back to maybe co-leading with a Gosling in another film or something like that. Yeah, all that is getting me very hyped and pumped. Now, the if we're gonna have lightsaber duels, I always figured Mia Goth was gonna be some martial-focused villain, so not too crazy for me to hear that. We still don't know if it's necessarily lightsaber on lightsaber. It could be very much like Din Djarin and, the Moff in season 1 of Mandalorian, where he's got the Beskar spear fighting against the Darksaber. It could be something sort of like that, but I think if you're really gonna take a big swing for the movie theaters and this be your real first restart of movies, yeah, I why wouldn't it be proper lightsaber? And that does bring the question to, like, what exactly is Gosling's role? Why is this still called Starfighter if we're gonna have lightsaber duels and things of that nature, right? So, it does seem like things are gonna be bigger. It really does seem like things are gonna be bigger than we expected. I know there was that little bit of, like, that walk around of Shawn Levy on one of the sets. I know he put a photo of him, like, running on the wall of one of them, and now he's, like, walking in full color. Very interesting. It seems like he's almost blending some prequel style with, like, the smooth lines, but with the corrosion of the original trilogy, and just something totally new that feels like something that feels like just another step past the sequel trilogy just from that hallway, right? So, emphasis on physical, all this and that, like, I'm liking everything I'm seeing. I know there's been a lot of memes of him walking around with, like, Drake songs attached to it, like, sad Drake song stuff, but that only speaks to, like, how people are, like, excited. I think people are really excited for every little glimpse that we're getting out of it. There hasn't been anything that's tempered or dampened it, and yeah, I don't like you're saying, I think people are completely underselling this whole Tom Cruise thing 'cause it doesn't register yet, but if we had just seen, let's say, like, a Fallout equivalent action movie from Tom Cruise, like, a month or 2 ago, maybe people would have been like, "That's insane. We're doing that." Instead, you know he's kind of in this weird transition phase, so I think people aren't really taking it as serious, and we're in this, like, award season with stuff like Marty Supreme, One Battle After Another, where things are a lot more grounded, and we're not really thinking necessarily of our big sci-fi franchise. Stranger Things ended, so that's an end to a big sci-fi like, fantasy sort of component in our culture. Avatar, like I mentioned, isn't getting necessarily that same cultural grab for, like, a whole month or so as it did with the first 2 movies. So, yeah, maybe that's why all these factors are just kinda pushing down the Starfighter hype, even though it is slowly growing and looks like it's gonna pretty much explode once we get The Mandalorian Grogu really off the ground and then let everything else kind of flow behind it.
I agree, and I think I mean, from that picture too that you talked about, I got very 2001: A Space Odyssey vibes looking at that, but then when you see it in color, it's like the complete opposite, right? It's not the pristine whites, and so there are a lot of interesting visuals with this. So there's a lot of great quotes too in the interview he did about, his inspirations and why he continues to return to stories centering around, an adult saving a child or helping a child find their destiny type of stuff. He compares a lot of what he's working on here with Stranger Things and all the lessons he learned working on Stranger Things. There's a lot of really great quotes in the interviews he's been doing, but yeah, I agree that, like, I don't think the Tom Cruise thing from what he made it sound like was, like, a premeditated thing. It sounded like it just was a spur of the moment. Tom Cruise is gonna help shoot this sequence, but still, Tom Cruise using his eye for action, you'd expect another level to, this production. On top of the fact that he also said Steven Spielberg was on set. There are a lot of people on set of just a, spin-off Star Wars movie. It really does feel like Starfighter, with how much they're hyping it up, with it being the 50th anniversary Star Wars release, with it being just star-studded, packed with people on set, packed with people behind the scenes who are all contributing to this project and interested in this project. This really does feel like the, like, Star Wars post-sequel Star Wars kind of renaissance movie. Like, they are trying to make Star Wars a franchise, uh, and I'm gonna say this very loosely because people take it the wrong way, but MCU-esque in that, like, MCU attracts stars. MCU attracts people who want to be a part of it. It's gone beyond the superhero realm to, like, "Hey, you don't have to lose your career to typecasting. to be in the MCU. You can play a superhero for 10 years, make a movie once every 3 or 4 years, and still have a career outside of the MCU. It really feels like Star Wars is trying to appeal broadly to, like, the entirety of A-listdom with this movie. Like, it feels like they're trying to get people on board. And we've talked forever about Steven Spielberg and will he ever make a Star Wars movie? Could he finish his career with a Star Wars movie or something because of his connection to George? I mean, that would be we did a tier list, our most underrated tier list, I would say, last year, where we ranked all the directors we would love to see make a Star Wars movie. And Steven Spielberg is still at the very top for me just because he is George Lucas's best friend. There are so many connections there that it would be so cool if there was like a Spielberg Lucas team up for a Star Wars movie. But it's just cool hearing all these people around this project. It feels like there's an enthusiasm and excitement around this specific project that hasn't necessarily been there for Star Wars since The Force Awakens. And I feel like that with this movie. Not necessarily the same hype from the fandom, but in terms of the people making it, it feels like there's a joy and an excitement about this project that I haven't seen in a really long time for specifically a Star Wars movie. Maybe the only other time I've seen that type of joy has been the first couple seasons of Mandalorian as well. But I'm really excited for this now. I'm getting more and more excited for Starfighter every day. When they announced it, my hype was the people making it, not necessarily like the name is so generic that I didn't know what to expect. But now the more and more you hear about it, this is the a Star Wars movie that's looking to possibly live up to the fact that it's going to be our 50th anniversary movie. And that's pretty exciting considering we're desperate for something really hype to get the Star Wars fandom back on board. So let us know what you guys think about Starfighter. The fact that there's going to be a lightsaber duel in Starfighter. Tom Cruise was on set. Steven Spielberg was on set. What do you think about all that? Let us know in the chat. True Shepherd in 7 says, cool that Tom Cruise is in Star Wars now. Seems a lot of actors are getting into Star Wars lately. Yes, similar thoughts as I had. Tom Cruise is technically still not in Star Wars, but he's now been a part of bringing a scene to life for Star Wars Starfighter.
Yeah, it could be a sort of situation like Daniel Craig in The Force Awakens, right? Like it could be that he was invited to set or wanted to see what the set was about. Obviously, I think in comparison to filmmaking potential and prowess, Cruise probably is a little bit more deeply entrenched in production and all facets of it. But who's to say because he got to do this, he was like, "Wait, let me get me dressed up or something, or put some crazy mask on me, and then let me have a little fun as like a background character or like a little like 10-second cameo, right?" And he could also simply, I know people probably don't love the idea of it, but we probably have some sort of stormtroopers still around in this era. I mentioned it before. I want something between the Sith Eternal stormtroopers, and then the First Order stormtroopers. Throw in some clones if you really want to go crazy. I know Kamino's destroyed and all that. It's not like it is in the Battlefront 2 of EU, but yeah, I'd love to see armored class infantrymen in Star Wars. That's always gonna be one of the most iconic visuals of the franchise, regardless of the era and regardless of the quality of the project. Those have always been hits for me, and I think moving fully away from it doesn't make sense, especially if Starfighter, the more layers that seem to be added on it, kind of feels more like the entire galaxy is like in different sections of it are allied in war. Everything is like a free for all, and everybody's just on the run and gutting for the very next day to another chance, another opportunity. So why not add in the elements that we know for sure are good while you're still pushing and trying to go for something new and creative?
Well, let us know what you guys think in the comments. We're going to get to some of your other chats right now from this. Sorry, new comment here. I was looking to see if it was purely about Star Wars Starfighter. We'll get to yours, Red 6, pretty soon here. But we're going to start from the top and work our way down. So let us know any chats you have, anything you'd like to ask us. It is open to purely anything you would like to say. We start with Brandon, who says, non-Star Wars question one, what do you think of the MCU's Blade movie being canceled and replaced with Midnight Suns? Yeah, there's a rumor that's been going around believe it was Jeff Snyder who said this. Um, I don't believe anything around Blade until I see it. I think it's, to be honest, kind of a mistake. It depends on what they're going to do with Midnight Suns. We haven't seen really any of these other team up movies work for Marvel financially since, their kind of fall off here in about the mid 2020s. Since they stopped being a guaranteed 700 million to $1 billion enterprise, Marvel as a whole, like Thunderbolts, Fantastic Four, neither one did very well financially. I just don't know why you would go that direction. I feel like Blade, even though he's not a household name, is far more recognizable than Midnight Suns. The most notable Midnight Suns thing that has come out in the last 30 years is the video game, but even that didn't sell that well, but people would at least recognize it. But they changed the lineup dramatically of that game, from the traditional Midnight Suns to try to sell more. They put Iron Man in it, they put Wolverine in it. So it wasn't your traditional Midnight Suns. I think the only thing that really makes sense out of it is if Blade we're I'm pretty sure they've confirmed, if not confirmed, like it's a heavy rumor that we're getting Wesley Snipes back in Doomsday and Secret Wars or one of them. Unless they are going with the Wesley Snipes Blade and he has a decent role in Doomsday slash Secret Wars, and they're gonna bring him back permanently as Blade, and Mahershala Ali is just kinda out, or they do some type of flop or switch where they introduce Mahershala Ali in Secret Wars, and Blade dies, Wesley Snipes' Blade dies, and Mahershala Ali's Blade lives, and he comes into 616 and all of that. If we're gonna do something like that, and we've already introduced Blade to the MCU, he plays a significant role. That makes a little more sense. But if you're doing most of what I'm familiar with Midnight Suns is the 90s stuff, which is Blade, Ghost Rider, and Morbius. And I don't know if that team really sells. Morbius, you don't even have the rights to. If you're Marvel, you'd have to get it from Sony, which I don't know if they would be too reluctant to give you Morbius. But you would still have to redeem the character of Morbius after the Jared Leto disaster, and then get people back interested in Ghost Rider as a film. Ghost Rider is a super popular comic book character, so there's an audience for it. But last people's taste on that movie were the two Nick Cage movies, and the second one was especially awful. So there's a lot of work to be done with the roster. I looked up earlier when I saw you ask this question, Brandon, just to see who the current roster of Midnight Suns are. And if they do something with this current roster, I could see it actually happening. The current roster is Blade, Doctor Strange, Elsa Bloodstone, Doctor Voodoo, Wong, Moon Knight, Man Thing, Ghost Rider, Iron Fist, and Scarlet Spider. So there's a lot of big heavy hitters in there. There's a lot of people like a Moon Knight who's just kind of doesn't have a place in the MCU right now, considering they don't seem like they want to do a season two, larger audiences. He hasn't been seen since what, 2022. So there's a huge amount of characters that could fit in this that have been introduced but kind of abandoned. So I can see where they're coming from, but I still think it would be smarter to start with a Blade project and then go into this and build out kind of your what's like the horror side of Marvel, because outside of the um that special they made, what was a Werewolf by Night special they made, which was really good. They haven't done really anything on the horror side in years, and so we'll see what Doomsday and Secret Wars does. But I'm not shocked they're developing it because Blade hasn't worked, but I still think Blade would be the smarter move first.
Yeah, I mean, the development of anything around Blade has just been a mess, right? We know that Sinners literally used costumes that were designed for the 1920s set version of Blade that was ready to go filming, and then the strikes happen, and they're like, "Well, let's reconsider what we're doing here." All right, so yeah, we'll see how it goes here, and Yeah, I don't know. I'm of the mind that they're trying to streamline stuff just because the streaming era is over. I know nobody realizes it yet, but we're only gonna get, like, a fallout here and there from every streamer, like, once every 2 years. You're not gonna have, like, 3 or 4 attempts within the same year. That method is gone. Like, even with the return of Daredevil to Disney, with the continuation of all the Netflix stuff, they're still trying to run it as, like, a proper show. They're not trying to make it like these 8-hour movies that have episodic chapters or have these classically designed storytelling techniques, like, they're not trying to, like, make a hybrid bastardization anymore, they're trying to make TV shows. So, yeah, I can understand that they want to, like, move everything more into one central way, and, even if it's not gonna make a huge amount of money, right? I think they're thinking that maybe both Thunderbolts and Fantastic Four did decent enough as, like, team-led films that they could now just move forward without having to, like, focus on having origin-esque stories for everybody leading into a story. Maybe the idea is to have teams be pre-established or you put together a team within a film. We've seen both versions of that in the past year, and again, they did decent. They didn't do anything as big as they wanted to with Fantastic Four. I think people were hoping for a little bit more from Thunderbolts as well, but both of them are pretty surprising. I think Thunderbolts with how C, D tier list character heavy it is, other than, you know, Yelena, right? Like, besides her and Bucky showing up because, you have to have some sort of A, B tier Marvel character. Without without them, like, it's a pretty tragic cast by MCU standards, and it's turned out to be one of the better handled and written ones, so I think that's what they're hoping for here, that they can kind of form up the team and have, like, their continuing chapters or, like, be lined up with what their initial chapters look like together. I think, like, when you bring up Moon Knight, yeah, season 2 kinda seems like it's dead in the water, but how do you get rid of using Oscar Isaac, right? With someone of that caliber and with a TV show that, yeah, got pretty decent reviews overall, right? You've already changed enough of the lore and all that, so continue pushing forward, make it even more fundamentally Oscar Isaac's depiction of the character and build off of that little tease at the very end of the 3rd personality that was, playing through all our perceptions of the story of the 2 main personalities, right? When we see Werewolf by Night, I think they wanna continue that and give Chiquino a chance to continue doing more stuff, but is he necessarily gonna just stick around to doing another, like, 40, 50-minute black and white presentation? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know if that's really what's gonna happen next, and it would have to be timed up with Halloween. I don't know if they really care about special presentations like that anymore, even though I've always found that to be a pretty solid starting place for a lot of these small characters and lets them really play with the genre. But yeah, I mean, who knows? And then you brought up a pretty interesting point about Morbius being in the '90s lineup. Yeah, obviously Morbius is a meme, right? More billion bucks. The fact that Sony fell for something that terrible to bring it back into theaters again, and it did even worse that they probably lost money simply on putting it back in theaters. Yeah, I don't think we're getting Morbius per se, but it is pretty interesting to think about like the Sony ownerships of certain characters because there are some rumors that they're seemingly gonna start opening up more access to Marvel and Disney to use the characters that they have. I saw some rumor about how there was they've been doing all these kinda Spidey-esque spin-offs without Spider-Man, and they were gonna do a Black Cat movie apparently that someone saw storyboards of, and it's at if you thought it was bad enough what we got with Morbius and, like, Cat was supposed to be a goth, and then she's crying at a party, and then she smears her mascara and makes the mask. That's apparently how her origin is on those storyboards. Real or not, just the fact that it doesn't seem too out there for what we saw from the Sony cinematic universe for these Spidey-esque characters. Yeah, yeah, I think that chance of actually seeing some characters that would maybe be a little bit more in line with what we see here in Midnight Suns, I it's not totally out of the picture. I think at the end of the day, if even if Sony has to take a cut or they get some sort of distribution rights or whatever it is, like they do with Spider-Man, I think both parties would be happier with the best version of the film that they can get and the best team up and what makes sense for the story past Secret Wars. Because again, this is not happening before or in between Doomsday and Secret. This is definitely after the universe has been reset, everything has been merged together. So yeah, it'll be very interesting how even that will be a story element if that's how you kind of force these mergers between these characters that feel so separate right now, but will tonally be realigned in a cleaner way because of some crazy shenanigans that happens in Secret Wars. Who knows? Who knows? But I I I I don't know. I would want to have a Blade film, and I want Mahershala still to be the lead. I want Black Knight because I want to see Kit Harington actually get a nice continuous role again that doesn't necessarily have the same tragic downfall as Game of Thrones. But it all comes down to what comes out of Doomsday, what comes out of Brand New Day, what comes out of Secret Wars. If those 3 do great, and these TV shows like Wonder Man and all that are well reviewed and all, maybe they do find that nice balance of between origin and team up films. But if it's not, I do kind of expect team up films to be the new version of origin films moving forward.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's not a wrong way to look at it. And again, if Marvel was at its peak, I think Thunderbolts is a 600, $700 million movie, but they're not in their peak. So it depends on how well they come off of Doomsday and Secret Wars, critically and financially, because this type of thing would be prime for MCU Phase One, Two, Three, especially if you went with the current lineup and you threw like a Doctor Strange in there for even just one movie, and then the second Midnight Suns movie, he's not in it as much. Um, but you throw in one heavy hitter and then build the cast around it. That would make more sense than maybe do spin-offs out of it. I think that can work. I mean, I would love to see Moon Knight back. I really did love a lot of the beginning of the show. It fell off really hard, but there were 2 or 3 really great episodes in Moon Knight, that I thought it was a pretty strong start. I really loved Werewolf by Night, so if they could find a way to bring that back, bring Man-Thing back, um, and I've wanted to see Ghost Rider for a long time. I mean, I really am hoping Nick Cage shows up as Ghost Rider in the Secret Wars movie at some point, but I want a serious Ghost Rider at some point in the MCU. I think he's a one of the most popular, famous characters that they haven't yet really done in the MCU, obviously excluding X-Men who are coming in. So it's a great question. It's a great idea to bring this forth. I just don't see it in the current state of the MCU working still. I think Blade is a much easier sell than Midnight Suns in the current state of the MCU. I think even um, a movie centering around like a Moon Knight might be a better, easier sell than Midnight Suns in today's MCU. I think people just need that familiarity. Right now, everything they tried to do to introduce new characters is just not working. So we'll see what they do going forward. Brandon's next question is also MCU related. Says, has the latest Avengers Doomsday short teasers shown so far, like the Captain America, Thor, X-Men, and Wakanda Fantastic Four teasers, made hype made you hyped that it could save the MCU? I've been hyped that it could save the MCU, but I think it will save it financially, especially this first one. Like this, it would be a shocking thing if this was not a $1 billion movie. Even in today's world where there's almost no guaranteed $1 billion movies, like you just mentioned, Sonic with Avatar, it's going to fall dramatically short of the first two, even if it is going to be a 1.5, $1.6 billion movie. Even today, with no real guarantees on where box office is going to go, I'd be shocked if Doomsday is not a $1 billion movie. And Secret Wars, I would also be shocked if it's not a $1 billion movie, even if Doomsday's not good, because people will want to see how it rounds out. People will want to either hate Secret Wars or love Secret Wars if Doomsday's not good. So there will be reasons why people go see it. I think ultimately, though, I'm not convinced yet that this is going to be a quality movie to the point that it will save the brand of the MCU in terms of brand trust and brand loyalty. I think you need not just Doomsday to be good, you need Doomsday and Secret Wars to be good, and you need them to be really good. And I think the other big thing for me as a fan, and I'm not speaking for everybody, but just personally for me, is I need answers to the story. I need explanations for why Robert Downey Jr. is Doctor Doom. I need explanations for why we're going back to the well outside of just money for Chris Evans. You know, I need all of those things actually to fit in a story perspective because 6 years ago, going on 7 years ago now, I watched Endgame and was very thoroughly happy with the way we ended an 11-year long story. And now going back to that well, that's one of my biggest pet peeves is when we go back to the well of something just because people liked it in the past, but don't really have any reason to. So if you come up with a great story, I'm on board, but I think there's still a lot of people like me who are tentative. I'm sure the majority are like, I see X-Men in comic accurate costume, I'm excited. Or the majority are like, I see Chris Evans, I'm excited. For me, I'm already excited because it's Avengers, but I have a hard time still making this like my most anticipated movie of the year until I have some type of grasp on what this story is and why I should really care because I don't have really anything that Marvel's done in the last 6 years to care about. There's been movies I've liked, there have been movies I haven't liked, there's been a few movies I've really loved, but there's nothing that's made me care about this specific story outside of my already pre-attachment to the characters from the past movies and pre-attachment to the comics. So, long story short, Brandon, these have made me more and more excited for the film because it starts to feel real, but they haven't given me any more confidence that these are going to save the MCU as a brand. I'm sure they'll still make a lot of money. I'm sure they'll save the MCU financially, but I don't know if they will save it as a brand yet until I really see what the story is actually about.
Yeah, it's the difficult question because I think that first one with Chris Evans, you're like, "Oh, that's nice. He's back," but it's just saying like Chris Evans is back. And then what was the second one? The second one was
Thor.
Thor. Thor I liked because it's like a, "Hey, we need to make sure to correct what happened after Love and
Yeah.
Thunder." And I'm still of the opinion that Himbo Thor works, just not without actually taking a proper stab at merging that transformation again for the character of, like, being all sussed out by everything in Endgame and all of that, and trying to just be happy after all that trauma, but then realize, life doesn't necessarily get better, you just have to get stronger through it and deal with, like, the very serious stuff with, Lady Thor and her storyline and what a god butcher is supposed to be doing, butchering multiple gods, right? That doesn't happen. You could still give me all those bad CGI moments, and I would be fine if the story was there, if Himbo Thor actually served more of a purpose, if we didn't have the screaming goats, right? Like, it could all worked out there. Sadly, there's nothing, like, visually stunning about, like, the Thor one or, like, anything that screams anything about Thor's current life. We know that he cares about his adopted daughter love, right? And that is that thread that is there in those first 2 ones. It's about characters that could be kinda linked up with the Fantastic Four, with Franklin Richards also being a child, maybe Doom's targeting children or something. Who knows, right? But I do like what I'm seeing out of just taking Thor in a more serious route. Thor with short hair, seemingly that's when we have the best Thors, right? That's what seems to be happening here too. So much more invested in the second one, just not as much in the first one. Even though I think Chris Evans is probably the one that actually has more relevance to the story than what, Thor's might be just like him, like, saying a prayer before he meets up with somebody for his part of the team mission or whatever. The 3rd one is obviously the most exciting, you don't bring back Magneto, Professor X, Stewart, and McKellen and not have me go like, "Yes!" Like, I'm excited. I don't care how many times these guys die or have, like, their endings. It's so very X-Men of them to have this many confusing restarts and ends that I'm like, "Yeah, why not just double down on it? I can live with that." But finally seeing Cyclops actually be Cyclops, like, forget about the costume, just the effects of it look right. Marsden just feels like he's embodying more the '97 version, like, I think we're seeing Sentinels in a more classic design too, walking in the background as everything's destroyed. It raises a lot of questions. Is this stuff that's gonna be like a prelude to everything, or is this gonna be caused by Doom, right? And how does like Teyana Taylor's Spectrum and her role in entering into that sort of X-Men timeline, is that the same one? Is it a slightly different one? I'm assuming they'd be linked up together just to make it streamlined, or she's not showing up till Secret Wars. But yeah, I mean, the idea that we're gonna see an X-Men that isn't quite necessarily the ones referenced in Deadpool and Wolverine, but probably is some version of the X-Men '97 that we've gotten and had so well received. Yeah, I am very happy about that, and n it does seem like they are gonna be, like, one of the main teams, and if their whole universe seems like it's gonna be based off of your conception of, like, different separate pieces, like, if you know just enough about every film since X-Men 1 back in 2000, you can probably string together enough of a timeline here, with what other X-Men media you've seen, and you'll be caught up. I think they saw what the version of the Wolverine that we got in Deadpool and Wolverine turned out so solid for them. But I think one criticism everybody had is like, which sort of timeline is he from? Is there anything specific about his backstory? So they're just going to be like, yeah, we don't have to 100% define everything, but let's put some more markers down, more Logan-esque in that sense that makes you want to like connect the dots, think about which films you've seen, obviously raise their money by having people check it out on streaming and buy more physical stuff like that, right? So definitely the most financially sound teaser they've made so far. I'll say that, and definitely the most riveting and exciting. The last one, I mean, I like M'Baku. I like Shuri much more after Black Panther 2. Um, I'm very curious why we're not seeing the full Fantastic Four, if it's apparently a Wakanda and Fantastic Four teaser. We're just seeing Ben Grimm, right? And meeting up in a random desert. I know we're seeing Namor, but I don't know if he's even gonna be connected with the events of this meetup or if he's gonna be in some sort of antagonist role. Like, if it were me, if you really wanted to hype it and build it off of comic history, have Namor meet with Sue, right? And then you're really getting people messed up. Or and I know Wakanda has a lot of connection with the Fantastic Four. Have Mr. Fantastic meet with Shuri to be like, "Oh, man, I can't save it with the technology of my world and my knowledge. We need to team up together." You know, have, like, intergalactic Wakanda like there are in a lot of the comics, so stuff like that, I think would have been the right continuous elevation while you're still allowing the first 2 to be very character focused. I feel like that 4th one was not the strongest one. It's just funny, but not the strongest, and is it gonna be giving me hope for Doomsday? It gives me hope visually. I'm liking all I'm seeing visually here. I think the Russos hopefully are learning a little bit more about, like, the blandness of their color grading being a criticism of the Avengers films that they did. I'm hoping that means that they're pushing forward with a little bit more tenacity and what they've learned from. Hopefully, they got tired of their own drawn out gray looking material, like, and stuff like quite literally the Gray Man on Netflix since their departure from the MCU like 7 years ago. So yeah, I'm excited for visually where it's going. I'm not so cynical about this team up happening. I'm just now on the same page though as Liam of like, if this is gonna happen, if this is gonna be an Avengers film after not having an Avengers film for so long, and now we're gonna have Robert Downey Jr. back as Doom, maybe not totally as Iron Man, or probably at some degree. Sure, why is that happening? Why are we having supposedly Peggy Carter back in some role too with Chris Evans? Is that gonna be really them building off of where he got left off in Endgame? If they're not doing that, I think that's pretty silly. You should make this feel like they're rumored to be as like a sequel to Endgame where you can, for the most part, just skip and ignore the stuff that you had from the multiverse era and just jump into this, right? They have to make it all make sense and have story relevance and purpose, but what I'm seeing so far tonally and visually strikes me right, and that's That's never been an issue with the Russos, so I'm pretty pleased with that. So my hype is growing a little bit, but I'm not, getting carried away.
Yeah, I think that's fair. That's a fair point as well, because I would be lying too if I didn't say I look at it and it feels a little bit more classically MCU. It feels a little bit more magical seeing these characters cross over. Even if the one today wasn't the most spectacular, just seeing the Fantastic Four with the Wakandans who first appeared in Fantastic Four. For Fantastic Four introduced so many things in Marvel, and just seeing that all come full circle, I think all that is exciting if you are a fan of the classic Marvel stuff. And that's the feel that MCU phases 1 through 3 had at its best moments. Was it had the joy and the spirit of what Marvel did in the 60s and 70s. Since then, we've tried to kind of go beyond and do a bunch of other things, and it's been a mishmash of eras and a mishmash of characters, and it hasn't flowed nearly as well. So it's exciting to see it get back to like we need some mainstays, some core pieces of this universe, and I think the Fantastic Four could be a great part of that. But it'll be interesting to see how they round it all in the form. Again, uh, I'm tentatively excited about anything MCU, but I this is gonna be one of those, day one watches, of course. It's the Avengers. I think where it goes beyond that, though, is really not gonna be until after I see Doomsday, because I can't be as hyped as I was for Infinity War without build up to that excitement, right? Build up from a quality standpoint, from a product standpoint of like, I just watched a ton of movies that all were great that built up to this. We haven't had that with the MCU, and all their best ones recently have been disassociated. They haven't really been connected. So, um, I don't think I'll hit previous MCU hype levels until I've seen Doomsday and it's really, really good. If it's not really, really good, then I'll be definitely very nervous for Secret Wars. Thanks for the question. True Shepherd says, do you guys think that the First Order Resistance War from the sequels should be called the Second Galactic Civil War? No, because the First Order is technically its own new government, so it's not really a civil war within the New Republic like the original Galactic Civil War was with, the Empire controlled the whole area, and then there was a insurgency group and the Rebel Alliance within that government. The First Order is technically its own thing that exists beyond the borders of the New Republic in canon. So I don't think the title would necessarily make sense. Also, Second Galactic Civil War has been used for Legends content. I like to avoid direct comparison between canon and Legends, especially when the stories are dramatically different. So I wouldn't necessarily use that there. But yeah, I just think logistically, it also still doesn't make that much sense to call that war um, a civil war. It's more of a war by an invading force rather than a civil war within the state itself of the New Republic.
Yeah, all those points, 100% accurate. Like, there's just the fact that we know officially in canon, even though we haven't seen it in any, like, definitive media. I don't think it's even in any, like, RPG handbook or something like that, like, essential guide of sorts, because that's just not a very common thing anymore in a more digital age compared to, like, the '90s and all. But we know that once the First Order first, like, really started appearing, a bunch of the centrists, I believe that's the political faction, they seceded completely and took all their assistants with them, and the New Republic just they're like, "Okay, that's fine," and this comes after Bloodlines. This comes after, the attempts with making Leia the first senator, essentially a chancellor with slightly more diminished powers, but not quite emperor-like powers, right? You're trying to still give a little bit more executive strength without falling into the same trap of, what happens when the executive is controlled by a Sith Lord, right? So, yeah, it's we're not in that sort of situation anymore, but how do you explain that to people when you look at the sequels, like that all this stuff happened, right? It makes so much more sense why the resources for the First Order, even if they still do feel like they come out of nowhere, you can still see like, okay, like they were staging and mounting all this stuff for this to be a massive attack and all that. But that is a big that is another big thing to point out. The First Order are an insurgency. They're not necessarily like a faction split off working from the core world out. They're working from unknown regions, outer rim, even some parts of wild space into the known galaxy. So that totally removes that whole kind of equation that we have in the original trilogy where everything's still outer rim, but, you're getting allies that are politicians, you're getting stuff in the mid rim, you're still getting core world support. It's not the same here, right? Like, there might have been system to system issues with the New Republic, but more of it is, like, the efficiencies of, like, almost dismantling any sort of checks and balances that would avoid, this kind of stalemate that takes place and makes the politics of the New Republic very stagnant by the time of the Leia novel in Bloodline. So, yeah, it's not gonna be called that. I think it's fair. I think people make an argument that it should maybe be called more of a First Order versus New Republic or First Order versus Resistance conflict as opposed to a whole war. I don't 100% agree with that, but I can understand that point of view just because there isn't so much that we see other than just what's in the films. We don't really have a TV show. We're starting to see stuff in like Legacy of Vader comics and all that really fleshing it out. But again, at the end of the day, something that's 1 year or 2 years in like galactic history is pretty minuscule compared to like I know what we've seen more played out in the prequel trilogy. Even if it was 3-ish years for the Clone Wars, we saw the steps towards that. We saw a whole era leading into the Clone Wars. We don't necessarily see that era quite yet for the New Republic's collapse and destruction. And what is the state of the New Republic? It's another thing. How can you really call it a galactic civil war when the central government is so far been completely assumed to be destroyed and have like no sort of backup center or power and all that. So I think it's the correct name right now. I just hope that they find a cooler name at some point, and maybe that's what they're working on when this post sequel era that they're gonna explain that that was just the conflict. This is the grander war where everything is being restructured in the galaxy.
So we're going to skip ahead to Critical Thinker, who says, "How well do you think Dark Forces Jedi Knight holds up compared to, say, games like Arkham Asylum or Assassin's Creed 2 or Brotherhood?" Not well at all. Dark Forces is really old compared to those games, like 10 years older. So even the last Jedi Knight game that came out, Jedi Academy, I believe was like 2003 or 2004 versus those games. I think AC2 was the oldest of those 3 games. I think it was like 2008. So there was a pretty big gap between those 4 years because of the console generation bump. Now, granted, I have actually played Jedi Knight more recently than I have Assassin's Creed 2 or Brotherhood or Arkham Asylum, but I have beaten Arkham Asylum at least 3 or 4 times in my life, and Assassin's Creed 2 and Brotherhood a couple times. Those are my favorite Assassin's Creed games. And having played Jedi Knight fairly recently, both Academy and Outcast, they don't hold up very well, in terms of gameplay, if that's specifically what you're talking about. In terms of gameplay, they don't hold up very well. If you're talking about story or the content of the game, there's a lot of cool things around it, but gameplay-wise, they controller layouts are difficult, gameplay-wise, it's kind of it's very PS2, GameCube, Xbox generation style versus the other ones. There's a significant console leap, generation leap, to me between PS2 era and PS3 era. So I don't think they hold up very well gameplay wise at all.
Yeah, not much I can add to that. I mean, I'd say even like the combat of Arkham Asylum is just such a standard now, right? Like
Yeah.
lightsaber combat has not been built off of Dark Forces and Jedi Knight, right? We see Arkham Asylum foundationally, that combat has evolved into all the other Arkham sequels, into a lot of other games like that, but you don't see, even though I'd say it still is one of the better lightsaber combat engines, it's nowadays kinda called very ragdoll kinda physics, and it's not weighty or hefty as, like, a lot of people are looking for, right? It's nice to see the dismemberment, but it's it's not quite accurate to the cinematic feel of Star Wars, more just the realistic depiction of lasers cutting people's limbs off.
Yeah, and they're still great games, and they're still worth playing if you're asking, like, should you go back and play them? Definitely. They're definitely worth it. I've played Dark Forces recently. It's on PC, and it's still a fun game. It's, has all the quirks of a 90s game, but it's a fun game. They just aren't as smooth to the, like, modern player as especially Arkham Asylum will be. Even with how much the combat improves between Arkham Asylum and Arkham City, it's still far more intuitive. And I would imagine Assassin's Creed outside of as the only thing I haven't played an Assassin's Creed game completely since Odyssey. I've started a few, but haven't been able to get through many of the recent ones. But outside of the old school, and if you grew up in that generation, critical thinker, you'll know what I'm talking about. They used to call it like the Assassin's Creed finger cramp, where you had to, on your controllers, pretty much anytime you did something, you always had to hold the right trigger down for your assassin to run. And then you would have to press different buttons with your thumb to make them, jump or drop or whatever. Uh, Outside of that type of control scheme, I think AC2 and Brotherhood they provided the standard, the format that pretty much every Assassin's Creed game is still mimicking, in terms of gameplay style since then. So I think they still hold up very well, in that regard as well. Next question was Critical Thinker says, how do you think Star Wars should try to return to form as cynical, nostalgia bait filled and desperate as Avengers Doomsday looks? It at least looks like Marvel's trying to take a big swing to revitalize the brand and win people back. Mando and Grogu looks painfully unambitious by comparison, and based on the director they chose, it seems they have no intention for Starfighter to be anything other than a pretty generic blockbuster as well. Well, you missed the excitement in our beginning part of our conversation if that's what you still feel about Starfighter. And I honestly felt that same way, that it felt fairly uninspired by the title when they announced it last year. I was not that excited for it. It just seemed like another Star Wars movie. But I can't say I'm not pretty enthused, and at least doubly, if not triply more excited than I was originally when this project was announced. Now, after hearing it has lightsaber duels, after knowing the cast, after knowing the people who have been on set, like I said at the beginning of the stream, the enthusiasm, the excitement around the people creating this project is sky high. I haven't seen this type of excitement since The Force Awakens. Now, if you're not a Force Awakens fan, then that doesn't mean much to you. But even if you're not a Force Awakens fan, I would say look at what The Force Awakens represented, the production behind The Force Awakens represented to a generation, to the culture at that time, and look at what Starfighter's kind of doing to attract not just Star Wars fans, but talent. And the accumulation of that talent and that enthusiasm is going to rub off on the wider audience. And if we continue to get more and more interesting stuff, like if the first trailer drops and it's got a cool lightsaber duel and it's got a bunch of stuff in it and it's got a Ryan Gosling meme, uh, this thing will explode. And so I think Starfighter is going to be far bigger than we ever thought it would be, both in terms of scope. And I predicted a while ago, when we talked about why it's getting so much promotion instead of Mandalorian and Grogu, that it was actually going to be a much bigger movie in disguise, than they are letting it on to be. But even beyond that, I think as maybe a first piece of like enthusiastic Star Wars in theaters again since maybe even Last Jedi, before it came out, you know, I think Starfighter has that potential now the more and more we see. Mandalorian and Grogu jury's still out because it's just not getting any help. And that's what's really disappointing because there's talent around it. John Favreau is a fantastic director. He has made some really great movies. He is a really good visionary. And I think if he's allowed to basically redo what he did with season one, and when we say that, we don't mean redo the plot. It's just kind of like reinstill that same vibe that he had in season one, the original concept of the bounty hunter, lone wolf and cub thing that he wanted to do in season one before he got really into the Star Wars lore stuff that brought the story, I think, higher in season two and then dropped it in season three. Before all that baggage, I think this is the movie that's he's going to be able to get to play around and do kind of whatever he wants with Mandalorian for the first time in years. All those things should look positive, but we have had zero promotion, zero help from the studio itself to get us excited for it. So I can understand the lack of enthusiasm. As for how I think they should return to form, I mean, we have talked about this quite a few times over the last year. I don't really have any new things to add because we have to see how they do with these next two projects before we can help them shape into another way. But I'll throw out the same things I continue to throw out, which is just the fact that they have to continue to try different eras, different types of Star Wars, really find a bunch of different avenues to gain new audience in, but find a core that can be your central Star Wars because we've seen with the MCU, we've seen with these big franchises that if you're putting out a bunch of product, you have to have something that pulls everybody in. For the MCU, it was Iron Man, and then it was Captain America, then it was Avengers, right? It was these key pieces that pulled people back in when they didn't go watch an Ant-Man. They came back in and watched Avengers, saw Ant-Man in it, and it was like, "Oh, maybe I'll watch Ant-Man now on Disney Plus because I saw that he's in it and I liked him in Avengers." For Star Wars, you don't have to have the interconnected universe like that, but you have to have something that continues to pull people back to Star Wars, that central piece that feels the most Star Wars, that feels the most classically Star Wars, and hope that that thing, whenever it comes out every 3, 4 years, that can be the thing that pulls people back and goes, you know what? I haven't watched Star Wars in a few years, and I heard these other two movies came out. Let me check those out. And so I think for all the different projects they can do, they have to find whatever that is. And maybe Starfighter and this cast of characters and this maybe soft sequel reboot with a new cast and a new set of people to follow can help us fall back in love with the main Star Wars timeline, with the sequel characters, with the Jedi and with the Sith and whatever they're going to do around that. And that's their hope to be the core Star Wars, and Mandalorian will be the extra stuff around there, the little bit more nostalgic stuff. And then they can do Old Republic at some point or whatever, but they have to find that piece. So that would be the thing I continue to urge them to do is whatever it is, just find something that the audience can really gravitate towards, that they can fall in love with a specific story and they can continue to invest themselves in it because we live in an era of television dominance. We live in an era of long form dominance. People love to throw themselves into things that they can really dive into and embrace. And that's why the MCU succeeded so well. And it's why this era of wait and see if it works, it hasn't been successful for Hollywood in film and in television because when you wait too long, people can't get invested. They want to watch the next thing. We're in the streaming, binging, long form era. And when people can't get invested by inundating themselves into something, they fall away from it and they move on to the next thing because there are so many things out there. So for Star Wars, they need that thing to latch onto. And I think if they can find that, they're in good shape.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, critical thinker, you're gonna have your opinion on this project until it comes out or you see something, and that's totally fine. We're gonna both be a little bit more glass half full because, we like what we're seeing from a filmmaking background, right? We like what we're hearing. We like the intensity. We like just the variety of ways that they're approaching this film and what they're releasing about it. right? This feels both very classically like George Lucasian, where you get to see cool details about, the series, which has, we've not had that since JJ first came in and kind of was like, everything's got to be hidden away and lockbox and, what's going to be in our Pandora's box and our mystery box of things, right? Like that, even though that hasn't necessarily continued from him, that mentality of keeping everything locked down definitely became a very important focus for this Disney era, this first phase of Disney. And, at the end of the day, maybe it's just me, but I'm always going to be optimistic about Star Wars. I think it's succeeded too many times for me in my lifetime for me to say like, "Oh, it's all dead, it's all gone." Like I have such wonderful memories of all of the sequel films, right? Like even if they weren't all great for people, sure, I still had a great time with each one of them. I enjoyed like my screening with Rise of Skywalker was with like 15 friends. It was a fun little time. I enjoyed that. And for me, it's just so sad that we haven't had movies in Star Wars. And if we are truly gonna have Disney lead this franchise forward, I think I've always known, and I think Liam and I have discussed it on stream, we're gonna have to get used to more mid-budget films. We're gonna get used to smaller focused films, right? I always kinda looked at this one to be like a more of a smaller focus film, like a soft entry point into the post-sequel era, but the more we hear about it, it's like, "Well, whoa, maybe they are that's how they're, like, telling it to us right now," but they're slowly building up this hype because they wanna shock the general audience once they put a trailer and people are like, "This is the next Star Wars?" Like, "Oh my god," right? And no matter what, like, I know what your argument is about, like, all I'd care about is the script. Sometimes a screenwriter may not make their best film till their 10th one. There's too many pieces of the puzzle when it comes to filmmaking to just simply say a script decides it all. Obviously, we want better scripts, but movie oftentimes are, like, a lot more about how you made a great script and then it gets kinda cut away or changed and adapted by directors, by studios and all that. It's not like how we see television, and I think more people are informed about television where you have all these kinda incomplete scripts, you have some version of a shooting script, you have these things that are gonna be shot in order or out of order by episode, by scene, and that kinda shapes how a season plays out depending on how well the production is going on. These are 2 very different mediums, and Star Wars has been stuck in the television medium for so long, and I think it colors a lot about how we look at this. I'm not expecting this film to have anywhere near the budget of The Force Awakens. It was a lie that movie was only 250 million. It's been more revised up to like 450, 500, and it shows, right? Even if it's not 100% perfect, that is a beautiful film in a lot of ways, right? And so is The Last Jedi and all that. And so is Rogue One. I'm not expecting that budget, but I am expecting someone who I've seen for 10 years on Stranger Things have the best action in all of the episodes of the TV show, oftentimes have some of the best and highest rated episodes, to have actually learned something in this era where, like, these longer form seasons, these seasons that are of a TV show that are basically 8-hour movies can actually translate it down to something a little simpler. Now, is he gonna do it? I don't know. I can't say that, right? But until I see something, I'm gonna be optimistic about these, like, little fun glimpses. I'm not gonna be upset about them. I'm not gonna say, like, "Oh, this is not enough for me," right? Because everything I have seen has been enough to make me go like, "This feels different than I expected," even from a guy with his resume. So, I'm happy with what I'm hearing right now. I'm not it's like how we talked about earlier in the stream with Doomsday, like, yeah, we obviously need to see what these story beats are. We obviously need to see what the direction the franchise is gonna take. We have to obviously see the full performance of everything too, but sometimes just one good solid film with some great visual flair can, reset things, right? I mean, if we really are gonna like make a comparison here, I think you can look at Kozinski with Tron Legacy. That is a film with a horrible script. There's no great script to that. But because of how strong his visual direction is, because of what he managed to get out of Jeff Bridges, what he managed to get out of Daft Punk, what he managed to put together, and in an era where Disney was experimenting with live action films still, he went on to do Top Gun, right? He went on to do F1. He literally is gonna do a Miami Vice movie with Michael B. Jordan and Austin Butler, right? This is gonna be the second film attempt, but Miami Vice is one of the most stylish, most confident TV shows ever. It's translated even into the Michael Mann movie. I expect to see that in his production, but they're also some of the most tightly written stuff ever, the most grounded nitty-gritty. Is that exactly what I'm looking for out of Kosinski in 2009, 10 when he makes The Legacy? Not really, but now in, like, 2026, 27 when it comes out, I've seen a little bit more of his career scope. I'm hoping that we're getting that from Shawn Levy. I think the fact that it's also the 50th anniversary, you're not gonna just have him have full free reign. You're gonna have people be like, "Hey, it's 50 years of Star Wars. This better be good." Right? We want this to be as good as possible, right? There's a where they've cut back on TV shows just like Marvel. We know Feige, when it comes to the MCU, is way more locked in on the movies right now in the last year or so since everything's kind of been restructured away from him having to have input into everything and kind of failing to do so. I think Disney as a whole just made a lot of mistakes in the late 2010s, early 2020s. Now they're all cutting back on their franchises, focusing on narrowing things down. And even if the talent on paper might not be spectacular from direction and from writing, I think just the other things that they've shown so far show and the confidence behind that suggests to me that they're also confident about the direction and the writing. Obviously, we'll make our decision when it comes out, but I just don't see a reason to be cynical about something I haven't even seen more than 3 seconds of footage for.
Yeah, I agree as well, and I know what you're trying to say, critical thinker, but I disagree with your bottom comment as well too, that it just doesn't sound like the focus of this movie is a good script. We don't know, how can we know that yet? We don't know anything about the movie. We don't know this plot. We don't know what the story's about. We don't
We
even
don't
know what the
understand
aim
the
of this
name
movie
of
is.
the movie, right? Like, that's the
Yeah.
whole thing that we've been saying this stream. What does that mean?
So personally, I can't say that yet. A script is not going to be s it's not something we have access to, have the privilege of reading prior to the movie, right? So it's something you can only judge once you've watched the film. If we watch the film and go, "Yeah, that seems like it could have used some more work," then great. Then we can make that assumption, but right now, I don't know how we can really say that. I mean, I think that argument could be used more towards an Avengers Doomsday or a Secret Wars, where it's more of like a concept movie, right? It's more of a, hey, what if we made Robert Downey Jr. Doctor Doom? That is less of a like script won the right to get made than this, because actually with Starfighter, it was pitched, right? So this is not something that Lucasfilm reached out to Shawn Levy and Jonathan Troper and said, "Hey, make us a Star Wars movie." They came to them and said, "This is what we've got." And they liked it enough to greenlight it. And even though they've greenlit a lot of movies in the past, this is the first Star Wars movie that's not based on something they've already made with Mandalorian that has gotten made since The Rise of Skywalker. And it's the first pitched Star Wars movie that's been made since Rogue One. So that's like, I don't know. That's a big vote of confidence personally to me in the script, because it's actually something that got pitched and made. So I understand where you're coming from. It is still hard to get excited for Star Wars, and it's the same reason as Marvel. It's hard to be at that level of excitement that I was in 2015 or for Marvel in 2018, 2019, because we haven't had the track record recently. But it still doesn't mean that the projects they're working on won't change that. I'm still open to that, and I think even if The Mandalorian and Grogu is just fine, but still fun, I'm starting with every interview, with every story about Starfighter to actually see why they decided that Starfighter was their 2027 release, as opposed to Dawn of the Jedi, which they announced prior and you would think would be a much bigger, more exciting movie than Starfighter, as opposed to the Rey New Jedi Order movie, as opposed to the Simon Kinberg movie, whatever the first one of those is, as opposed to all these other things, Lando, that they've announced. They could have
On
picked
for Ben
anything to
Solo being
really.
greenlit and canceled too, right? Like,
Uh-huh.
yeah.
And they could have picked any of these things to be the 50th anniversary movie, but they picked Starfighter. And I don't think it was just because those people were available that week to work. It was they apparently liked this project enough and felt like it was enough to stem their celebration for 50th anniversary off of it. The more and more stuff I see and hear about it, the more excited I personally am for it. So uh it's still, jury's still out. I mean, we might be completely wrong. It might be terrible, but it also could be one of the best Star Wars movies we've ever seen. Never know. But thanks for your comment. Next, we've got Red Six Down, who says, "I'm viewing both And apology, the sequels, I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. Excited for both Favreau and Levy, who are better than Johnson and Abrams, and we couldn't go without one lightsaber fight post Andor. I'm not really sure what you mean by your first comment. As it posed, as with Favreau and Levy, better than Johnson and Abrams. I mean, I think Ryan Johnson's still the most talented based on track record of those four filmmakers, from the films he's made in the past and now. Arguably the best filmography out of those four people, but he's also arguably out of those four people the person who worked least well with Star Wars. So it doesn't necessarily matter how your track record is. It matters how, your relationship with Star Wars is. But I don't think I think when it comes to big franchise filmmaking, it's hard to specifically take the talent alone and be like, this will equal great movie. Most of the time it does, but sometimes it could be a Shawn Levy who's been more of an underrated talent for all these years, and he might have the greatest Star Wars pitch. It doesn't necessarily have to be Christopher Nolan or Denis Villeneuve or Steven Spielberg. Although you would expect excellence from them. Shawn Levy could come in out of nowhere like an Irving Kershner did, and all of a sudden you got a great Star Wars movie, right? So you never know. But as for no lightsaber duel post Andor, and you might have a shot of no lightsaber duel if that's something you care about in Mandalorian and Grogu. I don't know if there's going to be specifically a Jedi in it, and I would be shocked if there's specifically a lightsaber duel. Maybe there will be a lightsaber in the movie, but I don't know if there's going to be a duel between two Force users in that movie. So, if you're hoping for something that's a little bit more stripped down basics, less Force related, maybe Mandalorian and Grogu is your movie.
Yeah, I can understand wanting to kind of stay in the Andor space, but Andor is so one of a kind. It's a miracle that it even happened. I know a lot of people, including myself, say like it's so awesome seeing Andor season 1 and 2 into Rogue One. But Rogue One used to be like what, and for a lot of people, it's still like who have not even touched Andor is like this is the Star Wars that we wanted under Disney. This is the best thing. I only treat this and the first 6 movies, right? Which I mean, sure, I think Rogue One is definitely better than some of the prequels. So good for you if you finally validated some of the prequels at the same time, and put Rogue One in the upper echelon of these films. But yeah, I mean, I look at it and I it's kinda crazy to say, but it almost feels like Rogue One's a bit childish next to Andor, right? It is like the action-packed climax, the final punches of, like, the final punches that break the dam open of the Galactic Civil War, right? And that's cool on its own, but once you pair it with Andor, which is such a serious character study about political repression, about, you know, guerrilla warfare and, what it takes to lead a revolution, how nobody in a revolution is sane, and the sacrifices being like, there's so many levels of detailed writing and depth that it's a shame to me that I do think part of why it didn't get a lot of nominations was that maybe it hit a little too close to home for some voters, and also because some voters simply saw Star Wars on the name and were like, "I don't wanna watch Star Wars. I saw Obi-Wan Kenobi and Mandalorian, it's just silly stuff," and just dismiss it. I saw that it's a pretty viral clip that came out recently from Amy Fowler's, podcast, which won, like, this new award on the Golden Globes for, like, best podcast. And, Andy Samberg was like, "I just saw Andor, it was so good," and she's like, "Ugh, Star Wars?" Right? And she's a voter, mind you, for a lot of these awards, which sucks, but that she's not special or unique in that sense, but Star Wars, because it's a sci-fi thing, people always diminish it when it comes to awards, right? Because it's a huge franchise that's had varying quality, people diminish, and because everybody has an expectation for Star Wars based on the Star Wars they engage with, that they didn't give Andor the chance it deserves, right? And it's such a shame because anytime people go to it now, they're like, "Yes, amazing, awesome," but money-wise, time-wise, structure-wise, how it came off, and how it managed to hit every note it needed to and then some, it's I want it to be something we aspire for, but I don't think we're gonna touch that level of quality all around, even in very good Star Wars to happen for years to come, and I also just don't think tonally having that Star Wars is appealing to as many people, right? It serves a specific niche. It grew for sure because of the quality of the show, but to some degree, it is a niche. It is the type of person who grew up watching AMC prestige television of, like, the 2010s, HBO originals, some HBO Max ones, right? But right before the streaming bubble, like, fully, like, erupted, right, into such a big size around 2019, 2020. So, I understand the love for that. I understand not wanting to go back to lightsaber duels, but at the end of the day, I think you're gonna win over an audience when you have, like, a really well done lightsaber duel attached with a very good film versus an incredible drama like Andor that doesn't necessarily have much action and is really about conversations and dialogue. It's just it's something that works more in the television format than it would in TV and, in cinema, and we know every franchise in the world is moving towards, that level of, filmmaking again. Everybody's like, streaming is just not profitable, and to do it where we get to make 8-hour films, it just doesn't make sense. It just doesn't work out. So I get it. I get it. And, I want that writing quality, like you're saying, critical thinker for everything, but just it's tonally, things change how you write stuff. I don't think Andor, if you made it for more of like a Rogue One sort of audience and with that tone of Rogue One, comes anywhere near the same level. I think we'd start seeing way more appearances of like legacy characters. I think we would see stuff that would make this more of a 3-season show because it had some cool action sequences as opposed to like some of the more depressing drama of it. I think some of it has to come down to its genre and its tone. It's not simply that the writing was so good and it elevated the genre tone. Those things go hand in hand. So I'm gonna have to push back on that a little bit there. But yeah, if it's not for you, like Liam said, hopefully Mandalorian Grogu is, because I don't think there is a lightsaber duel. It's gonna be a lot more blasters and robots and aliens and cutesy stuff, and if it's decently well written, I think that's all that matters, right? If you feel entertained in theaters and you feel like there's something that continues to move the story of Din Djarin, of Grogu, of the New Republic, of Thrawn and the Shadow Council by the end of this film in a very momentous way, even if it's not as huge as like a season of television could be. Sure, I think people will still love it just the same as people will love Andor, and hopefully you're that type of person.
Rixie says, "Is anyone excited for the Mandalorian and Grogu?" Uh, I think we're both excited for it, but not. When I say not excited for something Star Wars, it more means that like on the scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most excited I could possibly be. I used to be tens for most Star Wars things. Now for like a Mandalorian and Grogu, I feel like I'm like a eight because I still will be there opening night for Star Wars. I love the event of a Star Wars movie, just like I love the event of a Marvel or a DC movie or any franchise I really love. So even if it's not something I have a lot of hope in, I'm still enthusiastic and excited to go see it. I just don't have that much hope that this is going to be like a game changer, excellent 10 out of 10 film. I think it will be a fun, good time. So yeah, I'm excited for it. I'm like a 7 or an 8 out of 10 excited, which is low for me on a Star Wars project, but higher than I am for more excited than I am for most things that are coming out of 2026. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a fair score out of 10. I'm actually a little lower right now. I'm more like a 7, 7.5. And that's only because I've been frustrated with, like, the release of material and promotions, right? I think if you asked me back in early December, late November, I'd be at that 8, 8.5, but it's because it's like I'm confused. Guys, like, January is gonna be gone in a blink of an eye here. We're already halfway through the month. I need to start seeing stuff, right? And a lot of my 8.5 kind of feeling came because I saw that leaked Celebration trailer, and there was more dialogue in the summer about the film than there is now, right? And especially once we saw Doomsday get moved back, right? That already alleviated one of my biggest concerns. Will this be able to leg out to be more of like a 500, $600 million film than, let's say, a 400, 500. There's a chance for this to be 700, 800 because of that big shift. It's gonna be a crowded 2026, right? And the only way to win and carve out your spot, especially with the fact that they've have a IMAX friendly director in Favreau who's gonna absolutely maximize IMAX because how could he not after what he did with that incredible season 2 premiere? I just find it kinda shocking that the only thing we've seen from them recently is just that IMAX countdown of like, "Oh, here's the forged element, here's, like, a little bit of alien armor and stuff like that." I'm like, "That's fine, guys, but, like, why am I only seeing a slightly modified trailer of, like, the one that came out during the whole Jimmy Kimmel firing controversy and just was terribly timed?" Reset. Like, why are we still building off of that? That should be treated as a teaser. It feels like a teaser. Give us a proper trailer, and we just haven't. I mean, maybe they're going full send, and we're gonna see like a trailer and a modified teaser and some TV spot for the Super Bowl. But
I
usually, you
think
only
so.
try to go for scarcity too. There, you want to have one big, opening and make that your trailer, and that's it. That should be your conversation starter. So they have to start now. I think they have to at least give us some TV spots or something on the way here. But if they give us a trailer and they really tell us some story beats and stuff, I will jump back up. At the end of the day, all we've seen so far, even in all the leaked trailers and stuff, has been visuals. Nothing that tells me anything about Din Djarin and Grogu other than they've been hunting down some Imperials and they're gonna be in a big gladiator ring and see Jabba the Hutt's ripped son from the Clone Wars. That's all we know so far.
Well, I was looking at two because I think Super Bowl is for sure when we get the next footage of this movie. But I was looking to see if ESPN had any of the other big football games from this round on. And their last football game of the year is the Sunday afternoon game, 12 p.m. Pacific time of Patriots Texans. So I don't see that as being a time to drop a Mandalorian Grogu trailer at noon Pacific. So I would imagine they do still wait for the Super Bowl. It will be about 3 months, a little over 3 months before the movie comes out, which again, I think is a huge mistake, but I think that's what they're gonna do. I think they're then gonna go all in with, like, a full blitz of marketing. They're still gonna save this month because we're still supposed to get, right, at the end of the week or next week based on that original calendar for the Doomsday release stuff, we're still supposed to actually get the full trailer at some point here in the next couple weeks. So if we get the full trailer and then we get Super Bowl 2 weeks later, I think they'll do that full trailer drop, that 30-second or minute-long Super Bowl teaser, full 2-minute trailer online with new stills, with all that stuff. I think they're just gonna do a full, like, Star Wars only marketing blitz after that for 3 months. That's my expectation for it, but I'm excited still. It's still I went back and looked at my rankings of my most anticipated movies of the year. I made a list a few weeks ago, and I still have it at my 6th most anticipated movie of the year. I think the only things I'm more excited for are The Odyssey, Dune 3, Werewolf from Robert Eggers, of course, Avengers Doomsday, and Godzilla Minus Zero. I would put above that too because I love Minus One's one of the great movies of the last 5 years. So, yeah, it's still up there for me. Excited for it. Hope you're excited for it too, Brixie. Brixie also says, I feel like a really cool Star Wars project, if done well, could be the Clone Wars in real life. Are you talking about live action? Because I think they could make a cool live action Clone Wars too. I think it's ripe for them currently. I mean, Ewan and Hayden are a little old, but we've seen them now play. I mean, we've seen Hayden now play episode 2 Anakin. They could do an end of Clone Wars, big epic movie one-off battle that we never saw in the show thing if they wanted to. I don't know if they could do a show. I feel like the actors are too old and there's not enough big stories to tell, do a full series, but I think they could do a pretty epic Clone Wars movie that's a one-off, and we can just all suspend our disbelief if they don't wanna do full de-aging like they didn't do for Obi-Wan Kenobi. If they don't wanna do, like, the full de-aging, I think we can all suspend our disbelief enough to just enjoy seeing Hayden and Ewan on screen together, with Mary maybe Ariana Greenblatt back as Ahsoka and, like, have that whole thing on screen because I think that would be a dream come true for a lot of Star Wars fans.
Yeah, I mean, you've actually spun a few gears in my head that have compile some cobwebs in the years, but, um, when you mentioned battle, I mean, all I can think about is Jabim. I know
Right.
there are rumors that Jabim was supposed to be bigger, but COVID restrictions and everything really limited it, and one of my favorite things about Star Wars, it's a sad thing that it's, like, become an important part of franchise building in the worst way, but when there's something that's less well received, oftentimes it improves with auxiliary media and, auxiliary storytelling, and that's what happened with the prequels. Like, as much as you can, appreciate the overall plot of the prequels, movie to movie, there are some pretty big dips in those first 2 before Revenge of the Sith really lands it quite well. Even if it's a bit messy, it still lands it quite well. But how people look at Hayden and how they look at Anakin as a character, absolutely reshaped by the Clone Wars, right? And seeing a lot more of that brotherly relationship between him and Ewan's Obi-Wan is because of the show, and we got to see so much of their banter and how much fun they could have during their fight for life at the points, right? And I'd love to see Obi-Wan Kenobi get a chance as a TV show to be improved with something like this, where you have a Clone Wars, like, straight to Disney Plus movie where you have them start off in the tank with Obi-Wan as he's healing. Maybe you put, I don't remember exactly. Is Vader also no, I don't think Vader's back in his tank after we first see him in Kenobi, right? I think he's always in his suit
I
afterwards
can't
after his
remember,
first.
but yeah, I don't
Yeah,
think so
I'm
'cause
gonna
the
assume yes, but what would be great is you put Vader back in the tank after he goes to Fortress Inquisitorius, and while they're before Fortress Inquisitorius happens and that whole escape, and you get to see them, um you get to see them, like, really, like, have, like, this almost, like, force meld and kinda go back to Jabim and everything and, like, how it leads into it, right? There's a way to write around it. I know the structure of the episodes has Jabim a bit later, obviously, but I'd love for that to be, like, kind of a way that maybe Anakin is almost trying to spin, like, in his twisted way as Vader, like, Obi-Wan, this is where you first failed me. This is where we first had a huge crack in our relationship and everything like that. And at the start of my fall was because of you. But Obi-Wan gets to see it as like what I taught Anakin. Like much like the comic, what I taught Anakin, even if he was messy about it, actually is what caused him to live, is what caused him to grow into that hero with no fear, reflects on me and stuff like that. And then you could have that be part of the healing process because that's the one thing I really didn't like after, instead of the Fortress Inquisitorius episode, not having an episode to slow down and actually deal with that first meeting, deal with emotionally where Obi-Wan is. That's something I wish could have happened. And you could make this just be about the battle while still having enough moments of him being pulled back into the tank, kind of realizing and feeling where he is in the present moment. So that's something I would like to see. I think that's a way to treat it as like a one-off still thing, but still also feel very connected to the most recent thing that they've done media-wise, and, you know, I again, I'm always gonna ask for a better de-aging to go kinda have a special edition version of Obi-Wan Kenobi because I think that's probably the only Disney Plus show that needs it as opposed to everything else, like, just feeling like a limitation to technology. You give it a little bit of a juice up, and I think it improves certain things. And why not also be like, as we're remastering this, we're gonna give you a nice little fun Clone Wars return to action and live action with these characters that fits in neatly between Obi-Wan's healing process and the steps that he takes towards saving Leia, saving the path, and then facing Vader for the final time. I know it kind of upends a lot about his connection with like Leia and Luke in those scenes in that final fight. But healing doesn't have to be linear, guys. Like I know it feels like that when it comes to storytelling, but I think you can do something pretty interesting and still allow us to have that Clone Wars battle and feel like it's a worthwhile addition to what's already been built before. And I kind of want to go to critical thinkers thing here. Clone Wars rehabilitated. PT's reputation is overstated by how much smaller viewership for cartoon shows compared to massive blockbuster films. Sure, if you're talking about the people who like, stayed with the prequels and then that was it for them. That's where Star Wars kinda ended, but for a lot of us, like, the prequel kids that grew up, it was the Clone Wars. That was our continuation, right? And the fact that it became one of the biggest streaming cartoons of all time, once it came onto Disney Plus, once it came onto Netflix, like, you don't get bought into a Netflix deal unless you're that worthwhile with how data analytics driven Netflix is. So I'm gonna have to push back on that claim. I get what you're saying monetary wise, but reception wise, how things can be clipped out, YouTube videos, the whole ecosystem around engaging with the prequels does not change if we don't have the lasting legacy of the Clone Wars. I agree in the point that the Clone Wars and what it did, like, as a TV show is a bit overstated because I think people absolutely ignore a lot of the weaker episodes in the first 2 seasons, a lot of the sillier stuff that happens until we finally hit our groove fully in season 3. It's not a masterpiece by any means, but I'm gonna push back on the sense that, like, it doesn't have an effect on that reputation. I think it's quite well stated because we've seen how it changed everyone's perception. We don't It's not just simply people aging up and being like, "Oh, yeah, I love the prequels." It's people who aged with the franchise, who grew up and had the prequels as their kid entry point to the franchise, and then their middle school entry was the Clone Wars, and then once the Disney purchase happened, it was like, well, I don't want that to go away. I was just quite in that mature animated cartoon storytelling, and I don't want that to go away because it's really improved everything about this era. I disagree with that. I absolutely have to.
I think the biggest thing it did was buy time and continue to push these characters into us as impressionable youths during that times our minds, right? Because that's the thing that they haven't done for the sequels, and I think it's been one of the reasons
Yeah,
why the sequels faded so fast for a lot of kids who might have actually liked them, uh, more so when they grew up, right? Is that they weren't, like, fed those characters over and over and over again like we were. When we were growing up, if you wanted to watch more Star Wars, it was prequels. It was only prequels. That was the only new stuff that was coming out was prequels. And so if you didn't like it, then you didn't have anything to watch. If you wanted to watch the whatever George Lucas was working on next, it was prequel related. And that's what he did, and doubling down in that, I think, led to, over time, when they found the story of the Clone Wars, because it did take them 1.5 seasons or so to really find their footing in the Clone Wars. Once they found their footing, once they found the story, once they found what the Clone Wars was, and it actually started to get great, they gave themselves enough time to do so because they kept pushing it out. And I think that's one of the big reasons why we still fell in love with those characters, because we didn't. George could have just said, "Well, nobody liked those. Let's move on." And I'm only selling original trilogy merch. We're going to make original trilogy stories. We're going to make original trilogy TV. We're going to make original trilogy comics. Everything's going to be original trilogy now because nobody liked the prequels. But he didn't. He doubled down on it. And by, basically forcing you to consume new Star Wars content, if you wanted to consume new Star Wars content, it had to be prequels. Then those of us who were willing to do so started to fall more in love with those characters again. Scrolling back up to the top, we only have time for a few more. Oh, but I did want to mention Anthony, YouTube fan first, who says, "Hi, gentlemen, just stepped out of the shower. Yes, I'm elated about the confirmed lightsaber duels in or under the water, no less, and partially shot by Tom Cruise, also on a fun, slow burn for Doomsday." Then said, "I guess it could be called the Galactic War on or conflict." This is about the Galactic Civil War question. And it only lasted for 1 year, and even John and Dave keep emphasizing how temporary an event the sequel trilogy was. Yeah, and that's a really important thing when we look at galactic history compared to even the Clone Wars was 3 years long, and that didn't dismantle, the government the same way the the sequel trilogy conflict did. So when we look at Starfighter, when we look at what has to, happen at that time, I mean, the fact that for the first time really in thousands of years, the galaxy is factionless, is complete vacuum for politics. It's an interesting time period. I don't know if Starfighter will be the one that broaches it, but it's an interesting thing to continue to flesh out as we move further and further into that era. Back to the top, we have Brandon, who we skipped because we take two from each person and then cycle back. We had Brandon who said non Star Wars question 3. Since for X-Men they're returning in Avengers Doomsday, do you think James Marsden will get his own redemption arc as Cyclops and say a line like, "To me, my X-Men from X-Men 97"? Yes, I absolutely think he will say that. I absolutely think he will have the heaviest story of any of the X-Men in Doomsday. I think he will be the one that you kind of ride with the fall of the Fox X-Men through. And I think he will have his big heroic epic moments as we kind of see from the trailer. It looks like Professor X and Magneto are going to be a little bit more less in the action. See, they're really playing them up. And yes, Ian McKellen is like in his mid 80s, but they are really playing them up in that trailer to look very, very old. They didn't try to make them look younger or make them look like they're 5 years removed from Last Stand or 5 years removed from Days of Future Past. They really made them look like they were their ages that they currently are. So, I fully expect them to kinda be on the sidelines more and more of, like, an emotional core for Marsden and Cyclops and all the other X-Men we're gonna see. I mean, I can't wait to see Nightcrawler. I can't wait to see so many of these characters we haven't seen in years, decades, come back. And then also the rumors now that Famke Jensen's gonna be in it as Jean Grey. I I would have been shocked if she wasn't, to be honest, because of everybody coming back. So, really excited to see that, and I think Marsden being somebody they highlighted in that brief, you know, 2-second clip that indicates the fact that he's going to have probably one of the strongest, most important journeys of Doomsday.
MCU's in this interesting position where like it's now been so connected to the Fox X-Men by having Hugh Jackman back that he is the guy who changed the dynamic of the X-Men. You know, Hugh Jackman is not the right candidate physically for Wolverine. He's supposed to be a 5'4" muscular, ugly creature, right? And also somehow passed around the whole X-Men mansion. I don't it's just how his character is, right? But when you see someone who's like 6'1" and ripped and he continues to get more and more shredded because you know how these Hollywood actors are on their special chicken and rice programs for their superhero films. Like Ryan Reynolds said with a Deadpool character. We're gonna play you till you're they're gonna play you till you're 90, man, and we're seeing Ian McKellen, Patrick Stewart have it. So Hugh Jackman at one point is like, "Logan is my end. That's good for me." But now he's like, "Yeah, I'm assuming I'm coming back in like a year." It's like, "All right, dude." Like he's just so used to it now. But because of how central he was to the storylines of all those original Fox movies and it getting his own spinoffs, and with how bad Cyclops was in those films, we just forget that Cyclops is supposed to be, like, the appointed leader, right? He's obviously who Professor X thinks is next up, but also he's, like, one of the few from what I've read of X-Men, like, I'm pretty sure Magneto has a lot of respect for the guy, and everything about his characterization sucks in X-Men. He's just a simp, and he's crying, and he's sad, and he just wears leather jackets, and he's like, "You expect us to wear yellow spandex?" It's like, "Yes, because that's what your whole look was. You are the yellow spandex, blue bodysuit guy," right? So, I expect it. Short answer, yes, he's gonna be awesome. He's gonna be taking the lead of whatever remains between the Brotherhood and the X-Men, because I assume they're gonna be combined to some degree. But, yeah, I don't know. We shall see how things go. And I'm not quite sure what the whole plan is X for the X-Men, if they're gonna be like a universe that has to be destroyed or something, who knows, but I think this will be a huge rehabilitation for the character as a whole, and that's important because regardless of what version of the X-Men we get, whether it be these legacy characters or, like, new versions of them, you still have to reset people's expectations for the character, and as much as 97 is great, it is a legacy reboot animated 2D cartoon on streaming. Put it in theaters, that's when you're gonna really change people's opinions.
Next up is True Shepherd, who says, "One thing I'm somewhat concerned about with Kathleen Kennedy stepping down is that I don't want the fandom menace to claim this as a victory and as an example of how to bully people out of their job. I do think Dave Filoni is the perfect man for the job. He was the direct apprentice of George Lucas, but even the fandom menace has soured on him when before he was seen as the savior to Star Wars from the evil Kathleen Kennedy, which I thought was ridiculous. Well, I think people are going to frame it however they want, True Shepherd, no matter what. The fact is that people have been trying to get her fired for almost 10 years and she still lasted for 10 years. So I don't know really in what world you can kind of convince yourself that this is some type of fandom caused event. The only correlation with fandom that this really has is if Disney at this point is like we're in a crux point for Star Wars. We kind of want to try a new direction, and viewership overall for Star Wars has fallen off. I mean, we just have to face it. As a Star Wars channel, we can see it directly based on our viewership as a channel, right? There are moments when Star Wars enthusiasm is there, but Star Wars enthusiasm is not what it once was. It's not year round. It's not uh, existing right now outside of, those of you who are joining us and those of you who watch our channel, those of you who are Star Wars obsessives like us. There are less and less of us every day highly in consuming Star Wars on the regular than there were in, let's say, 2015 to 2021. That was a big peak moment for them with Star Wars, and it does feel like this period has fallen more towards what I assume 2008 to 2012, 13 really was. And that's not to say it was a bad time for Star Wars because we had Clone Wars coming out and we had some great books and there was a lot of great stuff at that time. I was too young to really, consider that as an era of Star Wars versus what we've covered now or in the last 10, 12, 15 years. But that was a period where Star Wars wasn't super duper popular like it is now, but it still felt scarce enough to when something came out, there was still that hype. Even right now, Star Wars hasn't been scarce enough to just have that rarity hype of a new release, but it also hasn't been good enough to have that consistent, like, enthusiastic hype. So there could be business reasons for why Kathleen Kennedy could be stepping down. It could be Disney saying, "Hey, we kind of want to try a new direction." It could also just be she's like, "I've done this job now for 13 years, and I really don't wanna have to keep going with it. I wanna make some movies. I'm getting older. I wanna retire, make some personal projects, produce again for a little bit, and then just retire and go off into the sunset and have a happy life to, end her career." And I think it could be all of those things could be true. I think the thing that's the least likely is that the fandom pushed her out, because if the fandom was gonna push her out, it would have been after the sequels ended in 2019, and she's still here 7 years later. So I think it's hard for any objective group to really say that it's the fandom that pushed her out, but I understand what you're saying, but I think you have to just if people are gonna say that, you kinda just have to accept that they're gonna say that, and you're not gonna change their mind, and you just have to kind of look at the facts, and I think overall, the facts lead to the idea that it wasn't the fandom specifically that pushed her out, but it might have been the continual string of less popular Star Wars content recently mixed with maybe her own waning enthusiasm in the job, considering she's been there for so long.
It's yeah. I think at the end of the day, we're gonna see somebody claim on those rage bait channels like, yeah, we finally did it. We finally forced her out. Because, like you said, Liam, someone's gonna have their narrative. They're gonna stick with it because that's just what their channel is. That's just what they've been making money off of, right? It's sad to say, but that's how grifting works, right? But yeah, she's not young. She's like in her what mid 70s or something right now. I
Yeah, I'll
haven't
look it up,
actually.
but
Yeah.
I think she's at least in her late 60s.
Let's see. She's
Yeah,
72, guys. Oh, she was
yeah,
born in Berkeley. Interesting. I did not
almost
know that.
73 this year.
Yeah, and she was born in the college town that we went to and met there. Very interesting connection. But, yeah, she's not young, guys. She yeah, it's crazy to say for people like that, "Oh, like, we finally won. You finally beat someone who's an elder." Like, great, you finally did it. You pushed out somebody who's retired. So, yeah, great. You can say whatever argument, but I think she's done. I think she wants to produce, like you said. And frankly, her reputation has actually improved, I'd say, in the last year or 2, especially, like, a lot of the stuff with Iger's biography kind of first changed the momentum around it, and Gilroy has been such a huge advocate. He's like, "Andor's not here at all without her fighting for us," right? She fought for Hunt for Ben Solo and had it greenlit, got canceled out under her by Iger and Bergman, right? More of the reputation that she cultivated that was at its peak in the sequels, actually, I feel like it's disappeared a little bit since Mandalorian, since we started getting a little bit more of these projects, and I believe yeah, he did yeah, you can say acolytes on her record, but a lot of that was also, like, Carrie Beck too. That was one of the first projects she was, like, fully involved in, step by step. Filoni had a big role there too. So, again, she's made duds as the head, but I think more recently, even if they haven't been, like, anything super great, she has been pretty good, and we understand she's a part of the puzzle. She doesn't get to overrule a CEO when you're part of Disney. Maybe when she was, if she was in this position, you know, with George Lucas still running Lucasfilm, maybe you could have a lot more of an argument at this point in time, but yeah, I think there's just too many moving pieces, too many positives that are coming out of people to fully say that she's gonna have such a terrible negative reputation for the general audience. It's mixed and muted for sure, but I think that's sort of improvement over where we were in 2019. So that's how I look at it. So, yeah, I can understand how you're feeling, but yeah, and I mean, like you were saying, people are soured on Filoni too. I argue people are soured on decisions Filoni and Favreau made because they made them. Like, they kept on talking about, like, the timeline for The Mandalorian. They're like, "Oh, it's all in 6 months." People are like, "That's logistically impossible even by Star Wars standards," right? And they just kinda are vague about some certain things. Both of them have been better together than without, right? Those are fair things to say, absolutely. But, you know, we'll see how him and Linman do well together. But hopefully it's good. But yeah, I am at the same time, I'm not gonna be surprised when these scripting channels go from Kathleen to started putting red lasers out of Filoni's eyes after calling him a savior 4 years ago. It's just you're not stop engaging with it and they'll lose their value. That's how I look at it.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the only thing you can do because the narrative they'll make the narrative whatever they wanna make it, right? Just like anybody will for anything they want to sell, right? You change the narrative based on what you want to say. You can ignore you can look at the objectives on what's going on, and then you can look at what the subjective narratives people are crafting are. But regardless, I think Kathleen Kennedy right now, it's if you're a sports fan, we've seen now in this past year in football, the 2 longest tenured head coaches, John Harbaugh and Mike Tomlin, now both leave their jobs. Fired, stepped down, whatever you wanna say. They both left their jobs just like Bill Belichick stepped down as well. Um, Sometimes when you're at a change point, when you know things went well, fell off, and you know you got to re-step up, if you're a little older or if you've been there for a while, you don't wanna have to go through getting everything going again, right? Sometimes it's just like, is it worth it? I've got people online going after me all the time. I've got um, all these projects we got to now get off the ground. I finally got Star Wars back in theaters. I got Star Wars started on a good spot. Maybe it's time for me to just walk off into the sunset and say, hey, you guys got this. I've given you a direction. Run with it. That's kind of what Iger tried to do with Disney Plus at the end of his tenure. COVID obviously really shaped that, and then the Chapek hiring and all that. But like we see this a lot with people who've been there in a company or in a very stressful position for a long time. They don't want to have to go through a rebuild, for a lack of a better term. They don't want to have to go through a reboot of whatever it is they just worked on. They just spent a lot of time making whatever they were making, and they're willing to take a step down, do something a little less prestigious, maybe make a little less money just to enjoy the end of their careers and do something else that's a little fresh and a little new. And I feel like that's probably more the direction with Kennedy. on top of that with probably Disney is saying like, we could use a new voice as well. I think both of it's like a mutual parting of like, now's just the time. And that's really what it seems like because it's been something that's been prepared for a year. If she was fired, it would have just happened one day and then she would be gone and nobody would be, there would be no talk about, oh, who's the successor going to be? And oh, she's going to plan her press conference on a certain day. Like none of that would be happening if she was just fired. Right. So it's a mutual parting. And you hear that sometimes and it's not true. I think for this one, it is because it's been built up to for now a year that she's leaving. So, yeah, I think those are the facts around there. And I think we're going to have to actually call our stream tonight at that point. We have gone for almost 2 hours. So, we're going to have to wrap it up. Thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. We appreciate you all. Make sure you join us again next week for our live Q&A. Again, they start at 7 p.m. Pacific time. So join us. You can send in your chats prior. The chat rooms, the live stream links, they all usually go up around 4-ish Pacific time, 4 or 5 o'clock Pacific time. So make sure you keep checking throughout the day. You can send in your chats early. You can send in any super chats early that you'd like to send in. All of that to if you want to be first. But make sure you join us at 7 p.m. Check out the rest of our content. We just dropped a video last week that was previewing all of the stuff that was coming out from Star Wars movies and TV in 2026. Tomorrow, you'll be seeing the video that covers all the comics and books that are coming out in 2026. And then we're going to have even more content coming out throughout the next few weeks. We're going to get our tier list stuff up and running again in our rankings. We're going to get more original content up and running again on the channel, going back to fan question of the week here soon after a few month hiatus from that. Shorts are still coming out twice a week, every week. And then, of course, we still have polls twice a day, every single day. So make sure you check out all of that content here on Star Wars Lads. Thanks so much for watching the stream tonight, everybody. And we will see you all next week.